Hello.
Hi, should I move this baby swing or does it add some charm?
I think it's fine.
I'm very charmed.
It's like either the baby swing or a bunch of laundry. Okay. Hi, Nicole. How's it going?
Good. How are you, Katie?
Good. Thanks for having us.
No problem. Happy to you could join. So hello, everybody at home. Thanks for tuning in to the first of our weekly poetry series. Since April is National Poetry Month, we at Read It Again had been working to put together a poetry event in collaboration with Six Bridges Brewery, but that was obviously canceled by the apocalypse. So I encourage you all to find a way to support local businesses like this, perhaps for gift cards while we're all stuck in here. But I'm Nicole, the manager at Read It Again Bookstore, and I'm joined today with Kaite, Condon and Conor Bracken. I met Katie in Knoxville when I was getting my MFA and she was getting her Ph.D, and now we're both in Georgia. You moved here in August, right?
I did, yeah.
How are you enjoying Georgia pre-quarantine?
Pre-quarantine was a lot like quarantine now. I mean, my family and I are sort of homebodies, but we really, really like Atlanta. My husband lived here for a while before, many years ago, but yeah, we really love the botanical gardens. We love eating out on Beaufort Highway. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we like it. Pre-quarantine and during quarantine. Place to eat.
Yeah, pollen and all right now.
Yeah, oh my God, that is wild. There's a lot.
And you two know each other as well, right?
Yeah. Katie, we got our MFAs together at the University of Houston in Texas. And Katie was literally the first person I met when I was in Houston.
Me too. You were the first person I met.
Really awesome. So the way the formatting is going to work today, each poet is going to read, and then we'll have a discussion and answer any questions that you all watching may have. So Conor's going to read first. Conor Bracken is the author of Henry Kissinger, Mon Amour, published by Bull City Press in 2017, and the winner of the 5th annual Frost Place Chapbook Competition. His translation of Mohammed Khair-Eddine Scorpionic Son was published by CSU Poetry Center last September. Recent poems and translations appear or are forthcoming in Bomb, The New Yorker, Ploughshares, Poetry Northwest, Waxwing, and elsewhere. Former Moon Papa's Island poet in residence and poetry editor for Foucault, he is the current assistant professor of English at the University of Findlay. He graduated from Virginia Tech and received his MFA from the University of Houston. And Tim's gonna make these on the screen, and then we'll read whenever you're ready.
Cool. Thank you to everybody at home tuning in right now. Thanks to Katie for reading with me and inviting me to do so. And to Nicole and everybody at Read It Again. I'm really excited to do this. It's my first time reading to my own camera. I'm looking forward to doing it. Before I start with my own work, I thought I would begin with a poem that seemed relatively apt for the times in which we're living. And for those of you who follow the Poetry Society of America, maybe you've been receiving these emails. Well-established poets share poems that they return to in moments of strife. And this one was shared today by Robert Pinsky. And it's a poem that he translated with Czesław Miłosz, who is the author of the poem. And it's called Incantation. Human reason is beautiful and invincible. No bars, no barbed wire, no pulping of books, no sentence of banishment can prevail against it. It establishes the universal ideas and language and guides our hand so we write truth and justice with capital letters, lie and oppression with small. Puts what should be above things as they are. It is an enemy of despair and a friend of hope. It does not know Jew from Greek or slave from master, giving us the estate of the world to manage. It saves austere and transparent phrases from the filthy discord of tortured words. It says that everything is new under the sun, opens the congealed fist of the past. Beautiful and very young are philosophia and poetry, her ally in the service of the good. As late as yesterday, nature celebrated their birth. The news was brought to the mountains by a unicorn and an echo. Their friendship will be glorious. Their time has no limit. Their enemies have delivered themselves to destruction. And now I'll start reading from some of my own work. I wanted to start off with something that's a little bit more both bombastic and perhaps positive. My work tends to investigate a little more the seedier underbelly of human thought, and I guess that'll kind of play itself out as we go through. This is called Obeyed, and for those at home, Obeyed is a song, a morning song to kind of celebrate the arrival of dawn. Obeyed. I worry that in the blue mornings of some new life, I'll stand in front of my slim closet, finger on chin and murmuring. Blonde gun, brunette, my red-headed gun, curly-haired or straight, what gun will I wear today? In this new life, a gun as a kind of wig, a sleek toupee. My bald hunger gun covered for hunting. My bald terror thatched over with steel. My entire skimpy certainty shingled, weatherproof and thick. Oh gun, impervious roof, slick ceiling, penning all my fear and hazard in. Oh gun, be of my hefty new life, even though as always the yoky morning drifts into distinction, the shadows limber up, and I am the kind of question prodding at the day and its illimitable dilemmas that fire is better at asking. Renew my horror-racked life, even though I do not need you to be afraid of anyone. I do not need you to dismantle this leaky trust we're walled in. Now I'm going to read one poem from my chapbook, Henry Kissinger, Mon Amour, which, as maybe you gathered, is an account of my romantic relationship with Henry Kissinger, the former Director of National Intelligence and Secretary of State during the Nixon years. He is, as yet, an uncharged war criminal, famous for architecting the bombing campaign in Cambodia, among a variety of other things, one of which is material assistance for Operation Condor, which briefly is more or less a state-sponsored campaign of violence against leftist dissidents in South America in the 70s and 80s. And that resulted in significant loss of life for a lot of leftist dissidents and intellectuals. And so this poem is called A Short History of Operation Condor. And this takes place in Argentina, which was one of the nations where Operation Condor was active. A short history of Operation Condor. Previously, on days of my sphere of imperial influence, I was necking with Henry Kissinger. We were standing on the roof of a teetering glass building in which 2,000 companies daily outdid each other in bilking the system that protected them from the masses we could see from our perch, setting little fires on the serrated green horizon. We fed each other delicacies with dirty hands, dulce de leche under our nails, beefy sinews between our teeth. We flossed with the flags of every country but our own. We bought islands we couldn't even strip mine. We were white and alive and in love with a little pulse in each other's wrist that went give and take and give and take and take my hand, said Henry. He was standing on the gray parapet of my soul. I couldn't tell if the heat I felt was the chlorine he'd poured into my ditchwater eyes or the masses combining their cook fires. I gave him my hand. And from each of the fingers he lopped off with the Damascene machete sprang a smaller, whiter, shrieking hand. They latched onto his, and there we were, together, doing what I called falling, what he called curb stomping air. So normally this is about the time that I check in with the audience and be like, hey, how are we doing? Because this can be a little bit heavy. So I'm just gonna assume that we're doing okay. I'm just gonna keep charging forward. And I'm gonna read a new poem that I wrote very recently during these quarantine times, because between being a new parent and walking the dog and teaching full time and trying to keep shit together, basically, sometimes you have a little time to write. And this one's called Coco Chanel Was a Nazi Spy, because if you didn't know, she was. And I hope that more people learn that she was a Nazi spy. Coco Chanel was a Nazi spy, but not a very good one. It matters, after all, if the stabbing victim makes it. If the embezzler leaves a little of the siphoned college funds to float the sprung accounts, where the invader leaves a hospital or two intact, enough to treat the rebels piebald with phosphorus and the children coughing plaster-clotted phlegm. Here's a moment where we contemplate the double-jointed etymology of treat, the verb to attend to, and the noun a goodie or a tidbit. And here's a moment where we don't. It makes a difference if you do it, and another if you do it well. Just ask the rare heirloom beans fused, inedible, and smoking to the pan. The mouse whose squeaking I needed several whacks to flatten out. If she had done it well, Coco, née Gabrielle, would have shoved her Jewish partners out of the earnings from her perfume due to the Aryanization of occupied France. But she didn't. She wasn't very good at much besides being a horizontal collaborator, and it makes a difference when you are. I don't make the rules. I don't report on my abusers who still strut, sultry as Coco and proud, as if out of a plane crash they engineered so the aging Balkan war criminal in F-12 bleeds out while they brush cinders off the finely tailored suit of their innocence. I just daub every morning onto my pulse points this fragrance. Wrung out of stones I rucked out of foreclosed multi-generation farmland I haggled cheap. And then I don my hat, whose silhouette echoes the bell hung to warn the townspeople. And I tie my tie, which is the clapper I ripped out of it so nothing will tell me what to run from or when. I just have two more poems, and we're going to go into a decidedly more positive direction. As I mentioned, Katie and I met in Houston, which for those of you who are not there or have not been there, you've probably heard about a lot of the weather that they've had over the past few years. Katie left, unfortunately, much to my chagrin and many other people's. But I remained with my wife and dog, and we were there during Hurricane Harvey. And this poem is written about that time. And I figured these are disastrous times in which we live, so maybe I could offer a little bit of my meager insight from times like that, when masses of people are all struggling to survive. Love poem with Hurricane Harvey. Offshore, a storm turns, howling on its spit of air, and we flock ravenous towards order. We wait patiently in lines that press against the emptied shelves of grocery, liquor, hardware, home goods stores, advising latecomers on the location of candles, saving someone's place as he goes off scrounging for forgotten AAAs and cheese. As smooth as the meniscus that convex quivers just above the brim of a glass filled by a steady drip with liquid, we shuffle towards the register, slowly and polite, hiding from order with our mildness the knives we have holstered in our folded leather brains that glint each time we think of the storm rotating offstage, spinning its knotted, milky, turbid mass of lobes that slur and menace like a clot of nickels in a dress sock. We feel confident that we could say to order if it asked, "Of course, I do not think of these strangers as just bouquets to lay at the steel-toed feet of chaos whenever it drags serrated arias out of silence. These people are my brethren. If they are buried, I taste dirt." Now, these times are a little bit different. We shouldn't be standing in line close enough for this all to happen, but hopefully the spirit of resilience is something that we can carry a little bit with. This is my final poem, and it's something of a love poem, and it's called Kintsugi, which is a traditional Japanese practice whereby an artisan repairs broken pottery, and in so doing, blows gold dust into the particular, not alloy, material, adhesive, whatever they use to fix together the broken plates, so that the seams themselves where they have been repaired are now gleaming in gold. So it highlights the breakage and the repair itself. Kintsugi. Sometimes it sounds like I am singing, but that is just my voice smoothing fear into a shape. This blue rhombus, that green icosahedron, this cruelty-free pyramid in which I maladroitly bury the fact that most nights when you touch me, it is neither of us touching. A feather and an anvil. A silk scarf wrapping around a column wind and rain have bullied from the stubborn earth. How does memory fit inside the body? An intestine's pink boustrophodon, balled up blood-stained quilt, the segmented whorls of a tapeworm white and sallow as crumpled Kleenex? Sometimes we figure it out as if by accident and slip past its centuries into the darkness dusted with the pestled, glinting syllables of our names, some seam between us soldered so the vessel, whatever it is, can hold again honey or water or vinegar or wine. Thank you.
Oh, clap.
Thank you.
That was very good. I love how you captured the central role grocery stores play in disaster. I like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're a locus.
So now we'll have Katie read. So Katie Condon is the author of Praying Naked, which won the 2018 Charles B. Wheeler Poetry Prize. There it is. And it was published by Mad Creek Books. Her recent poetry has appeared in or is forthcoming from The New Yorker, Tin House, and Prairie Schooner. Katie's poetry has received support from the Breadbook Writers Conference and Inprint. She is the 2019 to 2021 Creative Writing Fellow in Poetry at Emory University. She holds an MFA in Poetry from the University of Houston and a Ph.D. in English from the University of Tennessee. Okay, Kim will make you big, and then...
Thanks so much, everyone. I'm assuming there are people here. Thanks for being here. And thanks you, Nicole and Kim, for putting this together. This is a really cool platform for a reading. I'm really enjoying it. And thanks for reading with me, Connor. It's always so fun. So I'm reading from my book, Praying Naked, which feels exciting. It's only the second time I've ever read from it, and I've only had it in my possession for a couple of weeks. So it's a very new and exciting experience for me, and thanks again for diving in. So the first poem that I'll read is one that I wrote many years ago, but it's one of those poems that, even though it's a few years old, feels really appropriate to our moment. So I'm going to begin with this. It's called Origin. I was born inside a mourning dove. There's wind in all of us. Here I am in a century that has its eyes shut tight. Don't I know exactly why I'm here? In the end, the sun varnishes us all in amber. Undress for that light. There is flight in all of us. Find me in the pasture, sewing bluebonnets into each bend of our laughter. I was born inside the decayed mourning dove you found shaded in lavender. Call me maggot. When you die, don't worry. I will rise up from you, opaque as the angel admiring your rotted waist. I too will die, am dying. Though I'm a maggot, though I covet fragrance from your breathless flowering, I am born from grieving. I am as afraid as you. So a bit different tone. I was gonna say a little different tone, but the next poem I'm gonna read is a little rowdier. And I wrote it when I was spending a lot of time crushing on this guy, as people crush on people in the age of the internet, which is like Facebook stalking them or Instagram stalking them. And it's called Giving Myself Advice. Katie, it's clear you want to tear through his body like a derailed freight car through a turnip field. Forgive me for sounding aggressive. All I mean is recklessness turns you on. Admit it. You love a lawless man. A man who scales mountains without any underwear on. A man who can open you up a stubborn bottle of beer using only his teeth. The art of recklessness is hard to get right. It's about finesse, which might not make sense to you lately, Katie. You who scrolls through Facebook all morning thinking an act of recklessness is sharing the cat video your mom posted on your great aunt's wall, which you're watching now for the third morning in a row. Katie, get off your ass and be somebody would like to fuck. This does not make you an object. It makes you desire itself. Desire, when you want to lure a reckless man, do not shout that you're going to plow through his body like a derailed freight car through a turnip field. The poem began poorly. No, desire, if you love a reckless man, do not chase him on his tiny misadventures. Let him scale you like a cliff face, only after he's chased you down your tracks for a good while, eyes wide and mouth open, gathering what he can of your madly showering sparks. So this is another sort of like version of a love poem, I guess. It's not like giving myself advice, like the perfect love poem, the poem that's like, oh, the daisies are beautiful because I'm in love and everything's perfect. I tend not to write love poems like that. There's always sort of like I don't know, an air of despair or destruction, be it self-destruction or destruction by an unruly man. But anyway, this is called Argument for Loving from a Distance, and it draws on the myth of Orpheus. And I'm sure we all know that myth, but just in case, Orpheus plays a lyre, like a little harp, and he marries this woman named Eurydice, who not long after they're married is bitten by a snake and dies. And Orpheus decides to go to the underworld. And I'm just seeing, is my audio still not great? I think I have earphones. Should I grab earphones? Better now. Okay, well, just let me know. I'll keep an eye on the queue. Orpheus goes to the underworld, wants to visit his wife. Hades is like, hey, you can have her back. I'll bring her back to life. But she has to follow you out of the underworld. And the only rule is you can't look back at her to make sure she's still there. Orpheus does, and she doesn't make it out. Okay. Argument for Loving from a Distance. Raining this morning, and the foothills are dusted with the gray light that comes with bad weather. Even through the water's falling sound, the train makes itself heard across the city like church bells at midnight. What beautiful moaning loudness becomes when it's forced to stretch itself across a distance. Like the way my lover's song greets me from upstairs where he's singing in my shower. Even across our short reach, his voice sounds truer than it does when he sings and I am near him. Listening to him croon through the water's heavy moving, I'm certain Eurydice was pleased when Orpheus looks back too soon. How happy it is to die twice, when your reward is your lover's real voice reaching you across wind and water and time. How relieving the realization he is more himself without you than when he is spread out naked below him, your hair tangled in his palms and his song diluted from your sating his longing. What is constant across all love is the inevitability of its end. One of us will grow bored or one of us will die, and knowing this, Eurydice was best to leave love early. Wait too long and he'll stop singing, even from a distance. Go now, run from your love. May your absent touch be the bells he hears clanging out from the steeple into the gray night that slows into morning, where the train will try to outmoan the wind, where he will liken this moaning to the way you sounded beneath him. He will pick up his lust like a lyre and sing your name, trying to reach you wherever you are. And wherever you are, you will hear his song haunting the air like mist. Listen to how entirely he loves you for the first time. So I just have two more poems. The next one I'll read is called Getting Through Monday, which I thought was appropriate since in quarantine every day feels like Monday. We just have to plow through. And if you know actually what day it is, you have bragging rights because I have most of the time no idea. Is it Thursday? Okay, getting through Monday. It's difficult lately to see the point in even the world's most beautiful efforts. For instance, the fog that covered the creek this morning like a veil the wind moved aside every so often so the light could soften the water's rough face. Or the little blonde girl who sang My Darling Clementine to the monarch butterfly she cradled dead in her hands. Today, even the prospect of making love is unfulfilling. The sun is out, and I have no reason to be dismal. I don't want to die. I have so far understood my life as something I can control. Realize now it is not, and for recognizing this, many say I should be grateful. I'm working on it. In the meantime, life slogs through me like a slug through the garden, and other people die for no good reason while I watch construction workers move across the roof they're building and consider how this scene could stand for time, how each shingle is a year in our lives, and each nail something beautiful passing through it, anchoring us to the scaffolding, which is memory, and reminding us that we have no choice but to be here until the rain soaks us weary and we fall, leaving only dust, which is the soul, and heaps of concrete. And I'll close on a poem called Practicing Digressions. And there's not really much to say about this one. I'm just going to dive in. Thank you so much again for being here. And thanks to Read It Again Bookstore for having us. Practicing Digressions. I am eager to grow old. What a joy it will be to bear love down on whatever daughters I force into this sometimes lovely world, preaching similar things, I bet, that my mother preached to me, like, you are a woman, praise yourself. What a light her scriptures are on this morning that is gray and cool as the last lake on the mountain before it gives itself up to the sky. I meant to be telling you about age, not my mother, who is aging, not mountains or mornings or the unforgivably expansive sky. I admit, it will be difficult not to mention the robin on the wire, the light lifting itself up over my husband's slender body, which he lives in more confidently than I have witnessed of myself. I am practicing digressions on you, so that I can prepare for the ways my memory will loosen itself from around itself, uncoiling like the threads in the ice skating penguin sweater I'll love when I'm 80 and never want to take off, even as summer's weight bears down like my mother bore down on me. My mother, whose voice is familiar in this poem, though years will have bounded by since I last heard her sing. Where was I? Mountains, steep as memory, water, morning, light. My husband's body stirring, his hands trembling after thousands of mornings, exploring every new wrinkle on my breasts. Have I spoken of birds? How they stay on longer into the cold than they should, and for what? To learn how to forage for food that is not there? To harvest something finally of absence, that they will keep with them when they decide to flit off into the thick mist of late fall that, when I was young, I wanted to walk through, believing I would make myself a ghost. Thank you.
That was great, Katie.
Thanks.
I really like how your poems acknowledge the poem a lot of the time, the meta of it. That's always fun for me.
Thanks.
So now we're going to have a discussion between the two poets about your work and the connections between them. Oh, Allison is here. Hi, Allison.
Hi, Allison.
Hi, Allison.
Yay. Oh, Julia's here too. Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah, that is really cool.
Platform. It really is.
There are people watching us. Huzzah! That's great. I mean, I was very happy to just hear you read poems again, Katie. It's always so exciting.
I was happy for the same. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if you don't mind, I'll start by asking you a question, Katie.
Sure.
And I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase it. I mean, obviously, right now we're living in the times of social distancing. And in your poems, and I'd say to some degree mine too, like there are all of these distances that our speakers are crossing, right? But one of the things that I always find really interesting about your poems in particular, and considering their kind of participation in somewhat of the neo-confessional mode, which for people at home, that's more or less poets speaking in a voice that's very close to themselves, taking their own life experiences and transmuting them into poetry. Though that may be the case, I think there's always this difference between you and your speaker in the poem, right? And though I think if we were to like see you and your speaker on the street, we might mistake you for one another. But if we were to like ask you the same questions in separate rooms, you might tell different stories. And so I'm a little curious about how you consider your speakers in poems. Like, do you kind of construct the same speaker? Do you have a speaker who varies from poem to poem? How does it kind of work for you?
That's a really good question. I guess I'll start by answering the easiest and part of the question, which is what you just asked, which is, is my sound still wonky?
Off and on, just now it is. It wasn't during your.
Okay, does it sound okay now? I have some headphones behind me. It sounds okay now.
Yeah.
Okay, Nicole, maybe you could like wave at me or something. I need to go get my headphones. So I'll start with the easiest part of your question, which is what you asked most recently, which is, do your speakers vary from poem to poem? The same. I would say, I mean, it's reductive, but I would say I imagine that they are the same speaker throughout this book, which has a kind of narrative arc that I won't talk about. You can just buy it from It Again Bookstore and find out.
You should.
But yeah, I would say that I imagine my speaker is the same person throughout the book. And one question that I got, when I was workshopping this manuscript in Knoxville with Nicole, actually, I forget who asked this question, but someone posed the question, is it okay for your speaker to, in some poems, be this sort of like brazen, really awesome feminist, and then go and have an affair later in the book and feel equally empowered by that affair? And I think that the answer is yes. But they are still the same speaker. It's just the speaker's behaving badly or just differently, maintaining a different attitude. And that's a kind of distance that we contain within the self. Like, we're never perfect all the time, like we can spout, well, that's not the best verb, but I was going to say we spout whatever, moral beliefs on Twitter. And then when we're talking to our spouses, be like, say something a little off color. We're not perfect. And to pretend that we are is to me sort of like a boring enterprise. And so that's something that I think about with this book, but also when I'm writing poems too. And I think that my sound is doing a thing, isn't it? Or is it okay now?
For a second.
Okay, just for a second. I'm just going to keep going. I think that the poem is a place where you can sort of like act out, have a tantrum. And it's sort of like, it's a space where you can do that responsibly or just do it. I mean, and instead of doing it in real life, obviously it's possible to write a really bad poem that is offensive and shouldn't be written. But I guess my point is, I find it interesting and productive to explore the darker parts of the self that we sort of distance from our selves that we perform on social media or in person or professionally, on the page, and explore those feelings and thoughts. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it gets into this idea of like the performative self, right? Like we all perform selves, we all perform different selves in different contexts. And a poem is a place in which you can really perform one even further than you might actually in a regular human physiological experience. I mean, I like doing that in my poems too.
I was just gonna say, may I?
Sure.
May I talk to you about your poems?
I mean, I guess that's fine.
You do that. And you do it in such an interesting way. Sorry, I'm hearing the bassy sound. Now I'm like really sensitive about whether my sound is weird or not. You do it in such an interesting way. Like in the Coco Chanel is a Nazi spy poem, which I love. The speaker sort of becomes the antagonist. The speaker begins by antagonizing Coco Chanel, but then by the end, they are the ones putting on the perfume. They are the ones taking the clapper out as well. And in Henry Kissinger, Mon Amour, the speaker sort of does that too, if not becoming the war criminal, at least engaging in sexual intercourse with Henry Kissinger and like empathizing with him, but also being victimized by him. Can you speak to that a little bit? I would love to hear you.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about that. And part of it is like, I don't know. I don't like those kind of cheap endings where the speaker becomes the hero all the time. And this kind of speaks back to what you were saying too, right? In our own narratives, we tend to be the hero in some way, shape, or form. Or if not the hero, at least never the villain. And I think it's important for us as humans, but also as poets, to consider the power that we have to potentially verge into that here and there. And I think also based on my particular subject position as, a white dude, able-bodied, cisgender, heterosexual, middle class, like I've got a lot of privilege. And so the lyric I that tends to be associated with somebody who looks like me tends to be one that for a long time was somewhat the hero, right? But thanks to a lot of recovery and interpretive historical looks, we see now that that's not necessarily the case, right? So I also have a deep mistrust of the white male lyric I, and I tend to take it out on the I when I'm writing these poems. So even though they might be looking at somebody who is a totally villainous, vile, amoral creature with lots of terrible kind of transgressions that we can anatomize, that does not necessarily mean that the speaker themselves is in any way immune from or inoculated against those same kinds of transgressions or feelings. It's just maybe a sense of how distant they are from committing them. And so I'm interested in kind of, shining a light maybe on those possibilities within the speaker, and then also myself. I see the poem as a kind of purgative space in the same way you were talking about, where it's like we can play out some of the worst parts of ourselves or some of the less savory parts and see what happens and put them up for inspection.
Mm-hmm. Makes for a selfie poem.
You say a selfie poem?
No, but also that. I said spicy.
Yeah, I mean, I admire your poetry and how it does that in so many different ways, and how it also occupies this really wide range of, sometimes we have these really bombastic poems that are looking at these almost caricaturized versions of this swaggering, assertive, wonderfully exciting person to see. And then these much more quiet poems that are also still kind of pushing against, both received norms of femininity, but then also the sense that the speaker is in some way blameless or perfect. I was curious if you could speak to that range. Like, how do you move from, these kind of bigger emotional spaces and then these quieter ones? Because you do it so well. That's why the book is so successful too.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a good question. I think just to start really simply, not sort of like a pedestrian way to answer the question, but I like pedestrians. I like crosswalks. So much for it. Much of the book is voice driven, and that the sort of like bombastic, performative, like circus of voice and personality. And I really like writing poems in that style. I would say actually the only one that I read tonight was Giving Myself Advice that does that. And I sort of at some point just wanted to challenge myself. So I spent a summer reading like a ton of Robert Bly and other image poets. As soon as you're in front of an audience, whether you can see them or not, you can't remember the names of any poet. Who wrote Lying in a Hammock at William Duffy's Farm?
Oh, James Ray.
Thank you, James Wright. I kept wanting to say James Merrill, and I was like, it wasn't James Merrill.
Oh wow, that'd be so different.
Anyway,
That
I read a bunch of those guys and other poets too, but basically like and studied the image for a few months because I was interested in like challenging my aesthetics. And you know, it's possible to get sort of bored with your own poems.
Oh yeah.
And so I started writing these poems like you know, Argument for Loving from a Distance, which is quieter but also more driven more by image than voice. Really interested in like landscapes and all that. And so that's why those poems exist, I think, because I've consciously made the decision to try to write in a different aesthetic direction. But also I think I could answer it in a really similar way that I answered the first question too. Writing an entire book of bombastic voice-driven poetry wouldn't have accomplished what I personally wanted the poetry collection to accomplish. So of course there are many collections like Ferlinghetti and any New York School poet where you're mostly dealing with voice poems throughout the collection, and that's great. But for me, I wanted to create like a kind of accurate psychology of a person in this book. And it would be unrealistic if she was only ever always operating within a kind of swagger or bravado or rebelliousness. Like, I think there's a kind of vulnerability to the image that's harder to accomplish in a voice-driven poem. And so that's what I set out to try to do. Yeah. But you use image all the time. And you actually, God damn it, Conor, you actually managed to write voice-driven poems that also use really wild images. Darn it. I thought they couldn't live together, but here we are. reading a Conor Bracken poem that ends with curb stomping the air. Or I wrote down a bunch of lines by yours that I like. How does memory fit inside the body, which is such a beautiful line. And then you end it with a segmented whirls of a tapeworm, white and sallow as crumpled Kleenex. Within this like really lovely sort of like, well, this one's not super voicey, King Sugi, but anyway, I think you catch my drift. How do you do that? How do you delight so hard in language and voice and personality, but then also manage these like wild, sort of like absurdist, but really crystal clear images? Tell us your secret.
I don't know what the secret is. I think it's a lot of self-loathing and a lot of iterative generation. I don't know. I mean, it's nice to know that somebody thinks it's working, and I appreciate
it's working really well. In my opinion.
I don't know. I mean, like I get bored of my own poems too, and I worry that this is just like it's the same thing. I've got the same kind of like basic machinery, and I'm just feeding different inputs out, and everything else that comes out is just a different color of the same kind of bop it that comes out. And instead of like having a blue twisty thing, it's a yellow twisty thing. But
I love that metaphor. See,
but I mean, thanks, Katie. This idea though, I mean, and this is something that Tony Hoagland really wanted us to do from the beginning, right, in our MFA. And I think that every, really consummate poetry mentor is going to want to do to you too, is to challenge you to get out of your comfort zone and to build up these different poetic musculatures that you don't have otherwise. And the way that it presents this kind of like deeper psychology, I think is really great. And I guess I'm kind of avoiding your question a little bit because I want to ask another one, but maybe I'll set that aside for a second and talk about like, I guess, voice and image and how those can kind of play together in the same poem. I think part of it is I've noticed a lot in my poetry, like I like looking at characters a lot, be they the speaker of the poem themselves, whom I'm kind of constructing on the fly, be they Henry, be they Coco Chanel, be they Fabio being hit in the face by a goose because he was on a, literally happened. I thought about, but that's a different thing. But I find people to be really interesting, obviously, to consider as agents in a world, both moral and physical. But then they also give you this opportunity to say wacky ass shit because you can put some words in their mouths that you wouldn't put in your own speaker's mouth.
That's so interesting, yeah.
So sometimes that's kind of like my backdoor way of doing it, creating a pretty powerful isn't really the word, I guess, almost ostentatious foil that you can feed lines through. Because I know when I started at Houston, Tony was always trying to break me down because I had this really like high flown, highfalutin diction to me. And eventually to kind of tamp down his negative feedback, I started feeding it through the voices of other speakers. So I could still say it, but it wasn't me.
That's awesome.
But so I want to ask about vulnerability and power, because I feel like that's kind of what you're talking about a little bit with this like deeper psychological portrait of a speaker, right? Like this bombast is somebody who can really assert themselves and really put themselves out there and show how much just mightiness exists within the speaker. But then on the other side, we have this speaker who can be very vulnerable. How do you see those living, I guess, even, you know, in a collection, but also in a poem or in our lives? Like how should those be put together, if at all? I mean, that's too big of a question.
Well, I'm not going to answer the how do we do it part of the question.
That's fair. That's totally fair.
I have no idea. I could sit here and pretend like, oh yes, be vulnerable and powerful. My husband just put together this pub quiz for his family in Ireland, and one of the categories was who said it, Kanye West or Trump, and it's amazing. And I thought of it because they are two examples of people who have no balance, no semblance of equilibrium between power and vulnerability at all. So I guess I could answer your question, that part of your question, just by being like, don't be like those people.
That seems pretty good. A lack of introspection is a great way to be a dick.
Yeah, totally. But in the collection, I mean, again, I was interested. Well, I guess you can create a psychology of there. I mean, you can. I mean, Kanye West and Trump have kinds of psychology that have no room for anything but confidence. You know, even at the expense of sounding like a complete and utter idiot, and you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I won't make this a political thing, but I wanted to create a psychology of a very complex, ambivalent woman. A woman who, you know, could be quote unquote a bad feminist, like a good one sometimes, but mostly like very unsure of her own politics, I guess, and that in the way that she behaves and acts out her sexual desires and questions, her questions about religion and et cetera. I think on a level of craft, how I enact power and vulnerability different in different poems. I would say that by and large, the more image-driven poems tend to be quieter, tend to be more vulnerable, whereas the voice-driven poems tend to be a little bit more like performing an untouchable confidence, like with manic confidence. But also, I think that there are some poems that I didn't read tonight that do both at the same time. I think one of them is this poem that, if you guys want to, you can read on the journal Boat. It's called On the Seventh Day, God Says What You've Got Is Virgin Charm and a Knife in Your Pocket. And it's just a series of, it's like a conversation between the speaker and God. And she says things like, I say I've inherited Sappho's pussy and I believe me. But then she also says things like, you know, is this all I will amount to? The hot breath of months in my pocket. So there's a sort of like doubt there as well. And I think that the power and vulnerability on a level of aesthetics and craft in those poems are working on a level of tone. And you know, I'll just bring up Tony Hoagland again. He was our teacher in Houston. He has a great essay about tone, and he talks about an idea called dialectical tone, which is the installment of, how does he phrase it? A series of tones installed around a singular moment or something, or he talks about it like a tonal fraction. So in some of my poems, the tonal fraction might be vulnerability and power. And, you know, that's the dialectic, and they synthesize into something, you know, different in every poem. But one thing that it does do, in my hope, what I hope it does, is it creates, you know, a very human speaker, you know, someone who's very flawed, but, you know, also feels like they're really feeling really fucking sexy that day, and they're going to go with it, even though they know that they're behaving badly. I feel like that was long-winded, but maybe it wasn't.
We did get we got a question in the comments about how to cut poems. You decide what to cut and what not to cut.
Oh, awesome! Like from a poetry collection,
or within the lines. Either way, whichever one you want to talk about.
I just talked for a really long time, Connor, so I'm going to make...
Well, I really like your answer, and I'm glad that we could hear you talk more about the construction of your speaker. And I'm also, I guess I'm also really jealous in some ways of your ability to be like, this poem is going to do this thing, and this poem is going to do that thing. I always wanted to kitchen sink it, like Albert Goldbarth or something, and it's a difficult impulse to get rid of. So I admire that. In terms of Kleiman's question, what should we always have? I'm going to answer, I guess, on a poem level, because I don't have as much experience assembling a collection necessarily. I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm thinking of going back to like haiku or Ginsberg's form of the American sentence, which Diane Seuss has really wonderfully redone in her second most recent collection. I think it was in Four-Legged Girl. And it would be the turn. You need to have a turn in a poem. And if that's all you have, just one element and then another kind of surprising different element that is an intensification or a 180 or something that totally changes, that should be sufficient. Another way of talking about turn is, I guess, surprise. That there needs to be some sort of surprise in the poem. This can come tonally in the way that Katie's kind of talking about dialectical tone. You quickly establish, maybe a kind of coy, hair flippy tone, and then suddenly you have a knife stabby tone, and then bam, poem's done, right?
If it only were that easy.
I know, right? Yeah. Tone, I mean, maybe tone is a terrible example because that's so much. It takes a lot more to kind of construct. But that's why haiku images, and I mean, even in the American sentence, as Seuss does it, the image is pretty strong in that one. So I don't know. Yeah, that's what I would say. Turn.
And I guess what I would say, I guess I'll answer on the level of a collection, but it could apply to single poems too. Ed Hirsch has this quote, and it's somewhere in a poet's glossary. I think it's there, although I've been looking for it now for I think a year, and I can't find it again. So maybe it was someone else. Regardless, he says something like, a poem needs to risk something. The speaker needs to make themselves vulnerable or unliked, or say something risky, like how does memory fit inside the body is a risky question to ask in a poem. In that it could, like, depending on what you do with it, it could come across as sentimental or something. So like that's that's I think one example of how that could work. You handle that beautifully, obviously. I don't need to tell you that. But
Thanks,
so as I was going through my book, I was asking myself two questions. One of them was that, is this poem risking something, or is it doing something that makes the poem worth reading, frankly? Like, I don't want to include poems that are sort of like milquetoast in the book. And then the second thing, and that's a hard question to ask, because some of these poems, anyone who's working on a manuscript knows, you've worked on them for years, you really don't want to let them go, but sometimes it's like, you have to cut that family member out of your life because they're really not contributing anything to that's not a good example. But the second thing I asked myself with Praying Naked, and actually my husband was really helpful with this, and this is his question, so I'll give him credit for it. What poems are doing the exact same thing as other poems?
Yeah.
And that was a really, really practical question that helped me thin out the manuscript and make the narrative arc a lot more clear. Because, I would have some, again, like poems that I was really attached to, but there were better poems that I wrote more recently that were doing the same exact thing. So those are two ways that I thought about.
Yeah, I love that idea of the ripping. That reminds me of, like Tony once said something about like a poem has to have fresh blood in it somewhere. Also.
Yeah. Tony who said that, what I thought Ed Hirsch was saying.
Yeah.
No, okay.
But yeah, I mean, there needs to be that I think absolutely there needs to be something on the line for the speaker in some way.
The famous workshop question, what's at stake? That I kind of a useful question, actually. Oh, well.
Oh, and I want to say, I just looked it up. I was wrong. It's not Four-Legged Girl by Diane Seuss. It's Still Life with Two Dead Peacocks, which is also a really incredible book.
I haven't read it yet. I need to. I have it in my office on campus, which I can't go to.
Right? I have so many books in my office. Oh, I would love to read some more Mark Strand right now. Or even some Wallace Stevens. Nope. It's just all on my list.
Before we wrap up, what poets would you guys recommend other people look into and like buy the chapbooks of or the poetry collections of right now?
Ooh. Katie, do you want to go first?
Sure. Julia Kolchinsky-Deskop, who is doing it right now.
She's going to be with us later in the series. So.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. That's great.
2 new books out right now. Many Names for Mother and I might not get this second one right. Don't Bear the Bones. Anyway, they're out reading again. And she's a poet who I would recommend. And reading, actually, I'm just going to plug this event for you, Nicole, because I would recommend Louisa Maradian's book, American Radiance, as well. It's if you like comedy and humor in poems, Louisa is great. And the last book I'll recommend, so I can go on forever and ever, is Allison Davis, My Study of a Motel Clerk. I love that collection so much. And whenever she publishes her second collection, which I hope is soon, you guys should buy it because she's an excellent poet as well. I'll type those books into the comments. I don't think I can type into the live comments.
I'll find a to post it. You can.
Thanks, Nicole.
I'll post them.
Yeah, so those are just 3 out of I could suggest 20, but Connor, what about you?
I just finished D.A. Powell's new chapbook from Rescue Press called Atlas T. That's really, really good. I would highly recommend that. It's limited edition, but I think they still have quite a few left, and all of the proceeds are going to a non-governmental organization in San Francisco to help. I believe it's called Youth Speaks, and I think it helps queer underserved youth, as far as I can tell. So it's a pretty cool project overall. So that I would definitely recommend. Who else would I recommend? I mean, I'm really excited about Victoria Chang's book Obit.
Oh yeah.
Excited about Leila Chatti's book Deluge, which I still haven't got. And I've been hearing amazing things about Philip Metris's Shrapnel Maps also. So those are 3 things. I realize they're all Copper Canyon. So maybe there's something about Copper Canyon that I guess I'm just naturally drawn to. But those are 3 books that are coming out quite soon that I've been really looking forward to. So, yeah.
Well, great. Thank you guys both so much for coming and helping us kick off our first poetry reading series. Everybody should tune back in next Friday night, same time at 8 p.m. And we'll have 2 more poets here to talk to you again. So thanks, everybody. And
thanks for coming. Thanks for having
us. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, thanks for having us. It was so great.